Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Black Communities and COVID-19 webinar series. I'm Carla Slocum. I'm professor of anthropology at University of North Carolina and also director of the Institute of African American Research. I'm joined with my co-host, Mark Little. We are both, who is executive director of the Create Center at UNC, Chapel Hill. And we are both the co-founders and former co-chairs of what was known as the Black Communities Conference, also the longer title, Black Communities, a Conference for Collaboration. This webinar series is an extension of the conference that we used to hold in 2018 and 2019. The webinar series is still committed to trying to bring together scholars and representatives, leaders of Black communities to think about ways that they can partner and collaborate in ways that support Black community life. So today, each webinar has a different focus, and today the webinar is focused on, we're calling it Across the Diaspora. So we have today people who are, certainly they've been part of our previous conference. That's always who we usually have as our participants on this webinar series, our panelists. But we also, I'll also introduce them by where they are from and what their specialty is. So let me go ahead and introduce the panelists. First, we have Omotayo Owoye, who is a sociocultural anthropology lecturer in the Department of Sociology and Anthropology at Obafemi Awolowo University in Ile-Ife, Nigeria. He holds an MBA degree from the same university, and his doctorate degree is from the University of Pretoria in South Africa. His research focus is economic anthropology and human capacity building. And though Tayo has participated as a research facilitator on a World Bank funded research project on maternal and child health initiative, he specializes in social movements, textiles, looking at symbolic communication, and informal traditional economy, and also knowledge production in the education system. We also have with us today Alexa Potashnik, who is founder and president of Black Space Winnipeg, a grassroots organization in Winnipeg, Canada, that fosters organic dialogue on everyday experiences of being Black. Alexa has demonstrated a firm commitment to community development and social justice, influencing initiatives across Winnipeg that promote diversity and inclusion for Black, Indigenous, and people of color. Alexa is the festival director of Central Canada's first Black Film Festival, the Afro Prairie Film Festival, and founder of the annual Afrocentric artistic showcase Nuit Noire. Alexa has worked in creating safer spaces for Black folks and people of color in Winnipeg. And we also have with us Samuel Amate, who is an international consultant. He specializes in issues of entrepreneurship, debt, and finance. Samuel holds a doctorate in economics and an MBA from the University of Delaware and the Ohio State University. Samuel is the president and founder of the African Foundation for Entrepreneurship and Economic Development, an NGO that advocates for entrepreneurship in Africa and the concept of zero capital entrepreneurs, for which he has advocated in his book on the issue. Having taught in the United States, Europe, and Africa, Samuel has worked with major consulting, auditing, and accounting firms. And as I mentioned, all three of our panelists were participants in the 2019 Black Communities Conference. So what we want to do first is start out with some questions for the full panel. We'd like to just hear their thoughts on this question, and then we'll move to questions individually for each of them. So for all three of you, I'd like you to just sort of tell us what's going on with COVID-19 in your countries. What are the number of cases? What's the process for testing, tracing, and treatment like? And what are the major issues that are being confronted with respect to the virus? Tayo, would you like to start?
Okay, I would like to appreciate everyone at the Black communities for this opportunity. About COVID-19 in Nigeria, the first confirmed case of COVID-19 in Africa was voted in February 14, 2020. But in Nigeria, the first confirmed case occurred on the 27th of February through someone who came from Italy, worked in Nigeria, and returning back to Nigeria.
Are you still there? Looks like we're having some technical difficulties with Tayo. Hopefully he will come back. Samuel, would you like to jump in on this question?
Thanks a lot, Kara. Um, Greetings to everybody. Currently, the situation in Cote d'Ivoire, we remember that the WHO, the World Health Organization, has predicted that the situation will be dire in Africa, and especially in West Africa. They were forecasting around millions of infected and hundreds of thousands of people who should have been dead by now. But as you can see, when you look at the current statistics, we are far below those figures that were forecasted by the WHO. At this point in time, for the whole of Africa, Africa is made of 54 countries. And for the whole of the Africa, the 54 countries, we have around 126,000 infected. And we have around, for the 54 countries in Africa, we have around 4,000 deaths. And for the people who were recovered, and then we have around 52,000 people who tested negative after treatment. For the specific case of Cote d'Ivoire, we have at this point in time around 3,000 infected so far. And on the 3,000 infected, we have only 32 deaths. We have only 32 deaths. And we have around 1,300 people who successfully went through the treatment. So basically, those are some of the figures we have, which are far, far below what the World Health Organization and some of the health experts have predicted that will have happened, talking about millions of people infected and hundreds of people who have died through the coronavirus. Basically, what is going on regarding now in terms of the way things were handled? Initially, we have a problem where the initial situation was they were mishandled initially. We had in Cote d'Ivoire a case where people came from France and Italy, where some of the people refused to go on quarantine and went directly home. And later on, we can explain why is it very, very dangerous for people to go directly home to their home in Africa, based on the fact that contrary to the US, in Africa, especially countries like Cote d'Ivoire, we live in extended family, and then people live in proximity, and you can find a house the size of middle class US home. You can have between 15 to 35 people living in that house, the size of middle class US home. And then have like 5 to 10 people living in the same room. So you fully understand that that's very risky. So basically, that's what we have. And regarding the testing process, because of resources, because of the economic situation of most African countries, I have to remind you that in average, we have between 45% to 65% of population in African countries who are living under the poverty line, which means that on average in African countries, you have 45% to 65% of the people who live with less than $1 a day or don't have at least one meal a day. So that was very difficult decision to try to lock down those people, because based on the World Bank statistics, we have around like 40% to 60% of African economies who are in the informal sector, which means that you have such percentage of people working who have no insurance, who have no formal business, and who are just hustling in petty businesses, selling on the streets, and so on and so forth. So basically, that made it difficult for to test because the government didn't have the resources. And what happened was that most of the government, like government for Cote d'Ivoire, they have to turn to the World Bank and then the International Monetary Fund, IMF, to look for funding to face the enormous resources to combat COVID. So up to now, we, based on the figures, only 10% of resources required by to combat COVID has been accessed by the government of Cote d'Ivoire, which make it difficult for them to fight the virus. And basically, what they've been capable of achieving, however, was that so far, 2 weeks ago, they've been capable of opening 3 testing centers across Abidjan. Abidjan is the economic capital of Cote d'Ivoire, and they opened 3 testing centers. The first testing centers that they opened, people destroyed it. Some people came and they were like, actually, there was some rumors on WhatsApp, on Viber and other social Facebook, telling people that in fact the virus was sent by Westerners so that they can come with vaccine and vaccine Black people so that Black people should be bare and cannot bear any more kids, and then should be infertile. So there were all kinds of rumors, and as well as that there will be a vaccine that was the virus came in so that they can have the opportunity to inject vaccine to Black people so that to kill Black people, because Black people propension to expand in terms of population was too much, you know, for those countries. So there were rumors like that who were circulating on Facebook and WhatsApp. So the first testing center that was set up in Abidjan was ransacked, destroyed by an angry crowd who kind of buy on that and those rumors on Facebook and WhatsApp in Cote d'Ivoire. But eventually they were forced to use the army. So the government of Cote d'Ivoire deployed the army so that the 3 other centers, because they have to rebuild the first center, and then they built 2 other centers, testing centers, and they were obliged to deploy the army to see over the construction of those 3 centers. So the 3 centers were completed 2 weeks ago and are currently operational. And to end this part, one of the issues was as well the mask. One of the issues as well was on the mask. So there were a lot of discussion about it. So the government of Cote d'Ivoire was like, they've ordered 200 million of masks. And eventually, people were not happy because people were saying that this should have been the opportunity to develop the mask production industry locally, and that they should have trained local people to produce the mask and create an industry. So eventually the government went into bringing forth a tender to order 3 million of those 200 million masks that they were ordering that 3 million of those masks should be provided by local industries. And so a lot of people right now are trying to, build or forge their own entrepreneurial production of masks.
Okay, thank you. I want to turn back to Tayo. I see you're back. Sorry about the technical trouble. Do you want to pick up where you left off?
Okay, so I was just saying that the first case in Nigeria came through an Italian citizen that worked in Nigeria. And that was on the 27th of February. But of April, it was declared negative. However, most of the early cases that we had in Nigeria emanated from high-ranking officials and high-class citizens that traveled out of Nigeria, and without not too much of testing, the whole this spread across Nigeria, and Nigeria also to COVID-19 too. Aside from this, the whole of this period actually compounded Nigeria's persisting crisis. Even with the number of cases we have in Nigeria, just today, we had an additional confirmed cases of 182 new cases today, which make the total confirmed cases to be 8,915, and the number of discharged cases 2,592. Then the number of deaths is 259 deaths that we've actually recorded in Nigeria. Most of all these cases that emanated from Lagos State, which of other cases are also coming up from other states. However, there is hello.
You're going in and out, and I'm wondering.
However, there is a state that has been declared. Hello?
I wonder if you want to turn off your camera, because sometimes that helps for the connection.
Okay. So, yeah. So for now, we have the number of deaths is 259 that we've had so far. But Nigeria has a total population of over 200 million people, and so the testing thus far has been a bit on a dragging level. At first, we were unable to, almost about a month ago, the tests conducted were about over 10,000 tests, but as of today, we had 49,000 samples that have been tested for a dangerous trend. To me, it doesn't look good for Nigeria. Concerning the test facilities that are existing in Nigeria, we have tests as at April 15th. We had 8 states with the testing facilities, and they could do like 1,500 tests per day in Lagos and 1,000 tests per day in Abuja. But currently we have 17 states out of the 36 states having test laboratories in Nigeria, and the federal government of Nigeria is still having the target of having 60 testing centers for COVID-19 in Nigeria. Early reports says that some of the states had to wait for a week before their test results could be seen. But now I think it's getting improved day by day. Now I think it's about 3 days that the test results get returned for
to be seen. But some of the issues that have been emanating from Nigeria is, for me, count as old glories because of the victories over Ebola that really caused some laxities in terms of the operational way in which the federal governments are actually taking the pandemic in Nigeria. There has been the issues of lack of facilities in Nigeria to the extent that Nigeria currently could probably boast of 200 ventilator machines. Out of we have 200 million people in Nigeria, and we could only boast of 200 ventilator machines, which are mostly given by private individuals and corporate bodies. And so the question for us also comes up in Nigeria, that where are the incomes generated by Nigeria going? You also have, in terms of lack of facilities, you also have medical personnel, lab space and equipment and chemicals lacking in Nigeria. For me, the issue of the N95 respirators raise issues, because I see most of the political class wearing and having the N95 respirators, while medical personnel don't have them. I heard of a story of a nurse having a cloth-made face mask on, and which is quite dangerous for our health system in Nigeria.
Okay.
And where you have the political class hijacking this critical equipment. And so you have facilities being deserted by healthcare workers. They are afraid of their lives. They also have to take care of themselves because of lack of facilities and equipment. There are also the issue of shortage of reagents, questionable as far as the reliability, accuracy of the tests. The issues about the belief and percentage of most citizens concerning the COVID. People are like, is it even in existence? We can't even see who has been affected. Data has been kept secret. That you don't know the set of people who have been affected in Nigeria. So it seems as if the epidemic has been politicized one way or the other. But in all, the to stick to the law, get themselves to obey the law, but the hardship is really, really high in terms of economic hardship. Schools are being closed down. Most people in Nigeria are daily wage earners. And so it's been really, really, really hard. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Alexa, I want to bring you in on this. In addition to sort of telling us generally what's going on in Canada, we also wanted to hear from each of you about what's happening with Black people in particular, or particular ethnic groups in your countries. So tell us a little bit, Alexa, about what's going on with Canada, but tell us specifically about the impact of COVID-19 on Black Canadians in particular. Give us a sense of the racial composition and in terms of who's affected by COVID-19. Are there any ethnic and racial disparities like we're seeing in the United States that you're aware of? And also, I feel like I can't ignore what's going on today in the United States. We're having uprisings over the result of the killing of a Black man in Minneapolis. And this is, you know, people feel like this is sort of the layering on of the death of Black people, that, you know, we also have that related to COVID. So talk a little bit about these kinds of issues as you see them in COVID, or if there's any relevance. I mean, as you see them in Canada, sorry about that.
Yeah. It's like the numbers here, there's, to give some perspective, there's about 86,000 confirmed cases across the country. I'd say about 10% of that have resulted in deaths, but we're seeing a lot of the like physical disparities attack a lot of like obviously folks with like respiratory and underlying conditions, but I couldn't say, the only thing that's disproportionately affecting Black Canadians is the over policing in Black communities during COVID-19, because there's restrictions to go out. We're supposed to be practicing social distancing, self-isolation, and being in quarantine, and you're only supposed to really leave the house, for essential services. But the recent thing that came out of COVID-19 with over policing, a young Black woman, and we're still very fuzzy on the details because this just happened on Wednesday, was allegedly pushed off of her balcony from a 24-story building by Toronto police. And like I said, the details are not yet, we don't know all of the information, but folks are starting to act and advocate. So I think what's really interesting, what's happening in the States, like obviously it's hitting African community Americans really hard because you have lack of access to healthcare. Like it's, when I saw Donald Trump saying, I don't know why this is happening. Well, because of the lack of resources, socioeconomic barriers, and obviously would hit folks harder who have, without access to healthcare. But in Canada, I think we're seeing this with like over policing, especially in large areas of like predominantly Black communities in Toronto. I know where I'm from in Winnipeg, the cases in Manitoba are only 253. It resulted in 7 deaths. And though yes, Black folks are not immune to COVID-19, I don't think it's like physically affected as many Black folks in Canada as it has other racial groups, specifically like white folks. But I have just noticed the intense monitoring and over policing of Black communities in Canada. And even like what's happening with George Floyd and, so many cases. I think what's unfortunate, even in amongst the global pandemic, Black lives are not spared, right? It's very obvious that it doesn't, like, I've been doing this work for over 5 years in terms of like Black resistance and Black Lives Matter, and the world is watching and half of the world doesn't do anything. The only people who really respond are Black people. And it's exhausting, especially in a pandemic like this. But in Canada, I think Black folks across the country are just trying to practice self-care as best as they can. A lot of people are also frontline workers. And we're not, that's not even touching on our newcomer communities, folks who can't work, a lot of international students who are stranded here, who can't go back home. But it's funny that when, a very well-off and wealthy country is experiencing a pandemic, all of a sudden the borders open when they want to. I think it was, we let in doctors from Cuba who came into Ontario and were relieving people of COVID-19. And I thought it was really interesting that throughout the whole year, immigration in Canada and that anti-Blackness is so real, but then when we need help, then our borders open, no problem. I thought that was very striking. But yeah, the numbers, they're steady. They're really hitting Quebec really hard. Quebec is the worst province in Canada for COVID-19. But in terms of like COVID-19 relief and first responding, a lot of the access to healthcare, especially in Ontario, is very hard. I can just speak from experience. You would think the first non-essential services to open from Premier Doug Ford were golf courses, and eye clinics and chiropractors are still closed. And I just don't know how, white men in power rationalize what an essential service is, clearly, because they're not responding to a lot of disparities that are happening in vulnerable communities. And obviously, Afro-newcomer, Afro-Indigenous, and Black communities across the country are disproportionately affected and over-policed and profiled even more during a pandemic. So monitoring, but obviously we're not surprised, and we're doing the best we can to stay safe.
I had a question, and this is for everyone, but we'll start with with Tayo, and this has come up in a couple of people's responses, and this has come up in previous panels that we've hosted about data, information, and rumors. And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about how you see internet rumors, politicization of information, as you mentioned earlier, access to data, how you see that these things are being used to control people, or how people are responding to them, how they're impacting what's going on right now, and then any concerns that you have as this crisis hopefully doesn't, but likely starts to expand in your countries. What concerns do you have around data and information?
Okay. Shall I jump in, Mark?
Sure.
Like I was saying, I mean, regarding rumors, there were a lot of damages, that those rumors have impacted on different operations of the government in Cote d'Ivoire. I've talked about how people, based on rumors, went on to ransack and destroy the first testing center. And basically, today, I don't know why I myself has been asking some of my folks who are in the government, but zero picture, zero video of any infected in Cote d'Ivoire. So what we have is only that the government, the Secretary of Health will come on TV and will be telling people on a daily basis that we have 2,000, we total 2,000 infected, and then the day before we have like 25 newly infected. So people have started questioning why can't we see those people who are sick and who are infected? And up to now, the government kind of refused to show or bring forth pictures, video, of whatever of anyone who is infected. And that has started creating kind of like skepticism in the public, saying that are those numbers real? Or do we have more than what they are telling us? So those are some of the problems that we are currently having. And at the same time, the government refuses to back down on that approach of not showing or bringing forth pictures or whatever of people who are sick, infected, or who are dying. And then the other issue we have regarding data as well is that, again, as I was telling you, based on our culture as African in Africa, we live in proximity. And most of the time, when you take like a house of US middle class house size, you can have up to maybe 25, 35 people living in that house, and maybe 8 or even 10 people living in the same room. And the question people have been asking was like, if the virus is kind of like spread through contact, close contact, then the figures that the government is bringing to us are all false. Those are some of the rumors that have been going on as well. And but we'll come to that. The government was kind of like confirming those figures they have been bringing forth. One of the things that people have been discussing as well in the population was the fact that it's only with those testing centers that will come close to the real figures, because at this point in time, only people who feel sick who are tested, or only people who go to the testing centers that are, accounted for. And then most of the people, again, like I was saying, there was a lot of rumors on that virus being something that was sent by Westerners to kill African people. So that rumor is very strong. That rumor is very strong, still strong in the population. And people despite the fact that the military are protecting most of the testing centers, people, are not going there in numbers. And basically, what some of the people are saying as well is that we're gonna come closer to the real figures when, we have mass testing and people voluntarily go to those testing centers.
Great. And Tayo, we're going to switch over to you, but before we do,
Okay.
I just want to remind all of the attendees, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to type any questions or comments you have for your panelists, and we'll get to those in a second. So Tayo, if you talk a little bit about data and kind of internet
Yeah.
rumors and how you see those impacting what's going on in Nigeria.
Okay. So concerning data, there has been lack of data and depth of data in Nigeria. You don't really know who is being affected or who is confirmed case in Nigeria. And concerning rumor, it's the issue of trust here. If citizens trust their government, then the issue of rumor may be a bit, will come down a little, but you have several sources of information, even though, as some mentioned earlier on, we also have these daily updates that citizens can look out and watch out for. But how many people have access to even power, to even electricity, to have those information? Data is so scarce that you even see people joking that data is life. You need to manage it to even get this information. So some people don't really, because of all this, citizens don't even believe, some don't even believe that this COVID-19 exists. So when people are sick and you tell them to go for testing, they prefer to go to a nearby chemist or pharmacy to have their illness treated. And so most of the issue about data is that there is a dearth of data, and where there are data, these are shrouded in secrecy. Like you've not seen anyone that has been affected by COVID. You have someone coming out, oh, I was treated, I've been healed of this, I've been declared negative. Then, for instance, the federal government, in terms of their palliative, identified 2.6 million households, 11 million people from the National Social Register as eligible for palliative. And we have the data by World Bank and all these international figures saying that there is an estimated 90 million people that live in absolute poverty in Nigeria. And you're just giving 2.6 million households, 11 million people palliative. You have also the one that was given to businesses. So the question arises, who are the owners of the businesses? I've not seen anyone. And neither has anyone come out to say, oh, I've been given this. And so these are the problems with issues of keeping data in Nigeria. There is a lot of issues about that. Thank you.
Alexa, any comments from what you've seen?
So Stats Canada and Canada in general are notorious for not collecting data on race. Don't ask me why, it's just their practice. And it was very hard. A lot of Black folks actually advocated for many years to get statistics on like Black Canadians where we live. Just to give you an idea, there's about 80% of Canada's population lives in Ontario, and then everyone else is spread out throughout the country and a little bit throughout the territories. So given that 80% of Black Canadians like live in Ontario, obviously that's where most of the discourse and conversation comes out of. I think that's a lot of Americans' first or immediate idea of like Black folks in Canada. They come from Ontario or, you know, Nova Scotia and like the history of the Underground Railroad. So that just to give you some numbers, but even looking at the stats of COVID-19, there's not a breakdown of, you know, racial groups who are affected. I've seen predominantly like, actually it's very interesting too, what was brought up earlier, that a lot of folks, and they say the numbers are rising, at least almost more than half of the confirmed cases people recovered, which is strong. But I don't know, I haven't seen like anyone like sick. Like I know the hospitals are overflowing, and I know like, you know, they're telling you to practice social distancing, but I haven't seen enough people who recovered from COVID-19. Like all I'm seeing is this person like is affected, death, and then we never hear about the folks who recovered. So then I think that creates a lot of turmoil and uncertainty, obviously, in the public. And I think it's a tactic on the government. Like they want people to stay inside and be safe, but at the same time, other than just telling us to, you know, keep 2 meters apart or to wash your hands, you know, the uncertainty of this virus is making folks, I guess, panic. But if even just researching like the amount of confirmed cases, there's no breakdown of socioeconomic age. We just know that it affects folks with underlying health conditions, respiratory problems. I like a lot of nursing homes have been really affected by this. Like I know similar to like the death tolls in Italy, a lot of Canada's older population, and what from I've been seeing, honestly, predominantly white, have been mostly affected by the health disparities associated with COVID-19.
Thank you. I do want to remind everybody once again that if the audience, that is, the participants, if you have any questions that you'd like to pose for the panelists, please enter them in the Q&A function of your Zoom and we can direct them to the panelists. I have a question here that I wanted to bring up, which is, I wonder if there's any, you know, we as Black communities, we're very much interested in collaborations and partnerships and connections. And so I wondered if, since this is a global pandemic, I wondered if there's any evidence that you're seeing in your countries of people communicating across national boundaries, for sharing information, for support in some way about COVID-19. Are you seeing that? Alexa, you have an organization, as your organization partnering with other organizations in other countries. So what kinds of cross-national, transnational sorts of connections are you seeing with relevance to COVID-19?
There was a great emergency response fund developed by Black Lives Matter Toronto. So I think they collected around over $50,000 for Black frontline workers and like Black folks who lost their jobs in Toronto, and had that relief fund for, you know, any kind of essential needs for Black people in the community. So I thought that was beautiful. Our organization is looking to take our mental health support group on a digital platform. They relieved all the restrictions of like, everything's opening in Manitoba effective June 1st, like all non-essential services with obviously social distancing measures in place. So that's something that we're taking into consideration, but we obviously don't want to, you know, we'll do what we can to limit the spread. So we're hoping to relaunch our Project Heal program virtually. And I think with the amount of media we're seeing around like Black death, like I think it's very easy to get consumed, and while we're all social distancing and self-isolating, to get in that type of perspective and not reach out to people. And I can speak personally, like I'm definitely burned out of like the whole, just watching and seeing the disproportionate murders of Black people, really like on a global platform at this point. Like it's been years, I don't know how many other hashtags I'm going to see in my lifetime. And these are cases that are just reported and on camera and documented. We have no idea how many more people have been killed by the police in whatever state we're talking about. It's like sanctioned state violence. So we're doing what we can to remind Black people, specifically in Winnipeg and other parts of Canada, that you have to monitor the amount of media you're consuming because it's triggering. You can't constantly see Black death and be okay. We're all going through live trauma with this pandemic, especially with the amount of Black deaths we're seeing rise in this pandemic. So the solidarity that I'm seeing, it's really like Black grassroots activists just coming together and making a GoFundMe link or making a Facebook event page or a Zoom or a Google Hangout, anything that's like frontline first response. And it's still amazing how people with like no money, no resources manage to always cultivate their expertise and, you know, mobilize their communities when the government and other institutional, you know, resources are not there for us like we are for each other. So it's interesting, but we're doing our best to manage folks and help out with any sort of overwhelming anxiety and depression during these times.
Tayo, you're part of an academic community. You're a professor at a university. So what sense do you have about collaborations or connections, sharing of information among people who are in the academic community in Nigeria?
Okay, thank you. I know this is a new norm that we are having in Nigeria. Everything is going online, Zoom parties, Zoom birthdays, Zoom marriage, Zoom church services, online church services and everything. And so everything is really going online now. And here there are a lot of grants that are being advertised for scholars to research COVID-19. And on my own self, I and someone in architecture to do research on the use of space concerning children. I just found out that within all this COVID-19 thing, children are just left aside. We're talking about the economy, we're talking about this, but what are these issues with the children? So we had to collaborate on that. And then currently we're opening so a number of cases ongoing in Nigeria concerning COVID-19. And currently I'm also part of a group that is called Institute of Advanced, that we are having a program plan for July, August, where everyone is in they were also doing researches and exchange research group that I work with Camilla in Wardrobe. And these are few of the things that are actually ongoing in Nigeria, but a few that I've heard, just a few actually in between Nigerians and international scholars. So many issues because most of the schools are not are closed. Data earlier on is really expensive in Nigeria. So most scholars or most academics will not actually use their own fund to teach, mostly in the public schools because the private schools are working. And so they have the resources to really get their students engaged. But concerning the public-owned schools, most students are at home, do nothing, and there is nothing I think anyone can do. We're just waiting for the schools to be opened by the federal government, but they're doing it gradually, step by phase. We just hope most of these collaborations too will be bring out fruitful results. Thank you.
Samuel, tell us about the business end of things on this question. Any collaborative kinds of things going on regarding business and entrepreneurship?
I mean, thanks, Kara. First of all, one of the things that one should know about Africa is that we have a different way of, a different scale of defining businesses. For instance, usually we talk about small and medium enterprises, SMEs. And in Cote d'Ivoire, for instance, and SMEs is a business is considered a small and medium when it has less than $2 million turnover. So that's kind of tiny in the US because I haven't lived and schooled in the US. I know that in the US, when you talk about small and medium company, we are talking about even hundreds of millions of dollars in terms of turnover. But in Africa, we talk about small and medium company for companies who have less than 2 million US dollars of business per year. So there's a scale gap that one needs to understand and grasp when we are talking about company size in Africa versus company size in the US. And that's the first thing. The second thing that you need to know before I kind of jump into my analysis is that 98% on average, 90% based on the African Union and some of the World Bank figures, 85 to 98% of companies in Africa are SMEs. When you take the case of Cote d'Ivoire, where I'm living, 98% of companies are declared as small and medium, which means that only 2% of businesses and companies have turnovers higher than 2 million US dollars a year. So having graphs that gap in terms of scale so that you can fully understand when we talk about SMEs business in Cote d'Ivoire or Africa versus SME business in US is on the same scale. Then another issue that one need to understand as well about Africa is that, like I was saying, based on the World Bank's statistics, more than 40%, and some of the figures are like 40% to 60% of African businesses or economies in the informal sector. What does that mean? It means that 40% to 60% of economic activities are not registered. It means that 40% to 60% of economic activities are done by individuals who are not registered with the government, who are people selling on the street. They don't have any fiscal identity. They don't have any tax ID or whatever, nothing. So we have, therefore, only like 40% of business or activity that are in the formal sector. So that's why one needs to understand when we talk about businesses in Africa. And then what has happened is that when the COVID started, the pandemic started, the government took a number of decisions. So they decided like they have to close down because of social distanciation. They have to close down restaurants, any airlines, value chain, company, airline agents, you know, tickets, sales, and as well as movie theater, training center, anything that can bring people together in hundreds. So all those type of businesses were closed by the government. And that has created a lot of problems because most of the people have been living day by day. And like I was saying, most of our economic activities are in the informal sector, which means that people were living day by day. And one of the things that you guys have to understand as well regarding Africa, and particularly Cote d'Ivoire, is that we don't have any social system. There's no social system. What does that mean? It means that in Cote d'Ivoire and in most of African countries, when you lose your job, there's no unemployment allowances. when you don't get a job and you are you've completed your degree or whatever education, there's no unemployment allowances. So you stay, and if you don't have any family members coming in to help you, you die. So when you lose your job, you lose it. Nobody will come and then, get you any type of allowances to help you pay your rent or whatever. So only few government, those who have access to some social type of coverage are people who are civil servants, who are working for the government or who are working in the administration, or who are working with multinational companies. So you are in a situation as well where there's no health insurance, national health insurance covering people, not like in the US. In the US, at least, people are covered by their employers, but that's not the case in Africa. There's no health insurance period. And most of the people therefore find themselves with no health insurance coverage and then with no allowances in terms of unemployment or whatever. So the situation was very dire for the governments because they have to choose between locking down people who have been living on a daily basis from their own hustling activities and having not to lock down, and then people may die.
Samuel, let me stop you just right there. We're almost to time, and I want to get in one last question and just ask each of the panelists to respond very briefly before we close this out.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, it's fine. We just had a question. The question was specifically thinking about what can intellectuals and academics do in this time to feel proactive. And I want to broaden that just a little bit and just ask each of you, what do you see as something that you and whatever your role is in the community that you're in, that you can do to try to make a difference in terms of the health impacts or the economic impacts or the education impacts? And to keep it brief so we can make sure that we keep to time.
I'll let others talk. I've talked too much. I'll let Tayo and Alex talk.
Okay. I feel currently what I know that Black intellectuals or intellectuals around needed to do now, which is also quite problematic in Nigeria, is the spendable income is so low in Nigeria that even people find it hard to really know what and how they can even come in to help their communities. Everyone is just like, I need to keep my head safe in Nigeria. So everyone is busy staying and keeping that social distance. The little thing that I feel those in that group could do, or that we're doing right now, is we're just busy doing research, getting data personally, and not really driven by an institution or a private, but mostly private people or international donors reeling out grants for us to really do some form of a work. But aside from that, what people also doing in Nigeria is that, there is no real, so to say, established social system, so to say, but we have this traditional way of supporting each other, which mostly could be in Butu or anything like that. We just take care of ourselves and see where, if you have so many, you can give out to others, because there is a saying here that if you're a rich man and you are within 20 poor people, you're a poor person. So you need to reach out to others and help out. And mostly, I feel most of the people, the composition of people that this pandemic are really affected are the women and children, which are mostly in these informal sectors. And I heard one while I was going out, that I can't just deal with this. I need to go out to make money. I need to eat. And the woman was crying because that is her daily wage. That is, and she and her son need to eat. And so this is really, really, really hard. And the only way that I think intellectuals or anyone could actually come up now, because the governments are doing the little they could do, but we feel they can still do more, is that we just rely on that Ubuntu principle where we look out for each other, which is basically a Black mentality thing. We look after each other, and so that no one is really left behind in this life or living. Aside from that, too, is the issue of everyone is now homeschooling. So we're going back to where we used to be, even though it is still online. People are homeschooling. People who cannot afford to go online studies are teaching their own kids themselves. And guess who is involved? The mothers are the ones involved. They are being stretched at this point in time. Thank you.
Alexa, any last words for us?
I think the best thing anyone can do, academics, organizers, reach out to just check in on folks. The amount of people I've seen with increased anxiety and depression this time is quite real. I know the best thing I can do is offer this online support. I think it's imperative now more than ever that we really talk about this socioeconomic disparity and distribution of wealth. There are folks who work for the government of Canada who push papers all day long and who are senior advisors and don't really do much and get paid more than doctors and lawyers. And, the government of Canada did provide emergency relief fund for students and people who lost their jobs during COVID-19. But just to give you a perspective, it's about $2,000 a month you get from unemployment insurance, and rent in Ontario alone starts at $1,400 sometimes for a studio or one bedroom. So single parents, low income people, and a lot of the frontline workers that are really affected in our Black communities across the country. I think the best thing we can do is just make sure that we're checking in on folks and prioritizing our physical and mental health as best as we can.
Right. Well, thank you to our panelists, Alexa, Samuel Tayo. Thank you to the audience for contributing questions and comments for our panel. Also want to give a shout out to our team that helped put the webinar together. It's Cara Stith, Benita Ramsey, and Blake Robinson. And also the artwork on our flyers is produced by Lillian Thompson. She's actually a past participant in the Black Communities Conference, and you can check out and purchase her work at lillianonline.net. Next week's webinar will be next Friday, same time, on Black Communities, COVID-19, and University Engagement. And we'll have Arta Woodley at City University of New York who will join us, and you should get an email on Monday or Tuesday with the link for that. If there are other topics you think we should explore, please let us know. You can reach us by email at blackcommunities@unc.edu, on Twitter or Instagram at BLK as well as on Facebook. So on behalf of Carla and myself, I just want to thank our panelists again and all of the attendees. See you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you.